This is a video about how you don't need to justify your existence. Nearly fell over and died already. And you don't need to explain yourself. There's so much pressure, subtle pressure, but still pressure out there in the world that's asking us to just justify our very being and to explain the things that we want to do that are real. But the only thing that keeps us locked in that pattern of feeling like we need to give in to that and to justify and explain is a kind of unconscious guilt or some kind of programming from our childhood that's stopping us from being an adult. When you're an adult, you don't need to justify, you can just exist. And you don't need to explain, you can just do. That's what this video is going to be about. One thing I don't understand about these pylons is that they make them look so climbable. Like, who looks at this and doesn't at least think about climbing up there? Unfortunately, it would kill you. When I'm talking about justifying your existence, what I mean is you can't just be. You can't just be whatever it is that you happen to be unless you actually consciously choose to make an effort to live like that. Instead, you're supposed to be something else. Be what society wants you to be. Be what your parents want you to be. Be what somebody wants you to be. You're supposed to think what they want you to think, feel what they want you to feel, do what they want you to do. There's all this stuff out there online, in society, in the world, that's just asking you to step away from your own being. But at the end of the day, the most truthful thing that we can say is that I am what I am, and it is what it is. And so if any time you go against that, you're basically giving up your realness, you're stepping away from your real life, you're creating friction, frustration, and misery for yourself, and you're just going to end up living in the void, in a state of disconnection from truth, where nothing flows, you don't feel like you're growing, and you're just kind of going through the motions, trying to be something that you're not. The explain yourself part is what happens when you deviate from the norm, whatever that even is, and you try to step up and reclaim your realness and express something from a real place instead of just going through the motions of trying to perform your way through life and justify your existence to the imaginary judgment of society. There's a bird up here that's making so much noise, but I don't know where it is, probably a blackbird. When you have to explain yourself, it's basically what happens when you start taking real action, you start doing something that actually calls to you from a very real place, and then eventually people are going to start asking you questions. Who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? How are you really going to do this? Blah, 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 blah. All of these questions they're asking you to explain yourself are really just a projection of the other person's need to try and justify their existence. And so anytime they see somebody going against that standard way of doing things, they have to question it. Not because they don't really believe in you, but because they don't really believe in themselves. But if you're not aware of this, you're going to give in to that need. You're going to start trying to explain yourself and justify yourself and give all these reasons when actually you don't need to, because what's real is real, and that's the end of the story. But there's something inside us sometimes that stops us from realizing that and makes us feel that we owe people these explanations. Let's look at why that might be. Well, here's some snowdrops. This is very exciting. I actually feel like weeping. Not really, because I'm a robot. But this is a good sign. It means that spring is springing, which is good news because winter has been unceasing this year. It felt like it's never going to end. Even though I had a good time, I've been hibernating. But anyway, spring is coming. I hope those snowdrops give you a little inkling of hope. So anyway, sometimes we end up feeling like we owe people a justification for our existence or an explanation for the real things that we want to do. And of course we can consciously decide to give these things to people if we want to, but actually we're under no obligation whatsoever as adults to justify our existence or to explain ourselves. Really, like I already said, when it comes to justifying your existence, the only thing that really needs to be said is I am what I am, and it is what it is. And when it comes to explaining yourself and the things that you do, all you really need to say, if someone says, why do you want to do this thing, is because I want to. And that can be the end of it. Like, you actually don't have to go any further than that. The thing that makes us think we have to keep justifying and explaining when we don't, is because we have some kind of unconscious guilt that makes us feel like we owe the world something that we don't. Or, which is related, we're just playing out scripts from our childhood where performing and explaining and trying to be something we're not was a strategy that we had to use way back when to get whatever it was that we thought we wanted from the world. Love, attention, validation, a sense of feeling seen. What happens for most of us, or not most of us, but a lot of us, is that we bring those scripts into our adult lives, and so even though we are technically an adult, we just end up being an adult child, which means we're an adult. No, it means we're a child in an adult's body. And the reason we can say that is because we're still not really stepping into our realness and seeing ourselves for what we are, because we end up playing these little roles and scripts and all that kind of stuff that make us feel like the external world has more power over us than the inner world. Like I said, being an adult doesn't mean that you never justify or you never explain. It just means you do those things if you want to. When you're not coming from that real adult place, what ultimately ends up happening is those scripts kicking automatically, and then you end up going into justification, explanation mode, not because you've been present, but because you've basically been programmed to do that. And if you really want to live your real life and to put yourself in the flow, instead of constantly hitting brick walls that don't need to exist, then you need to overcome that programming and become present. And ultimately, that's why paying attention to when you're justifying your existence or explaining yourself are so important, because you can become aware of whether or not you're acting from a place of actual conscious choice, or if you're just giving away your power to the world because you think that you have to when you don't. When we fall into the trap of giving into our programming like this, then we ultimately end up doing two things. And if you can become aware of these, then actually it can really help you to overcome this tendency in yourself if you're dealing with this problem. The first thing that happens is, instead of just being present in our own lives, i.e. just coming from that place of being and then putting your being into your doing and your feeling and your thinking, instead of being present like that, you end up performing. You feel like you can't just be yourself, and so you have to put on the mask of the ego. You send many real parts of yourself into hiding in the shadow self, and then you just perform through the filter of the ego instead of just being present. The other thing that can happen is that instead of just receiving what's already there in life, because of this performing tendency, you end up trying to get things. You get instead of receive. You try to get instead of receive. Receiving means that things are already there. There are so many opportunities. There are so many possibilities for connection and things like that with people. But if you're performing, you're constantly trying to get something that is not actually there, because you're trying to fill that void inside yourself. And so let's just quickly talk a little bit more about these two things, just so you can understand them in more detail. But ultimately, it all comes back to either being real and present, living from the inside out, or from being unreal and stuck in the ego and living from the outside in. When we're performing instead of being present, it basically means that we feel like, as we are in our being, in our realness, as a temporary arrangement of matter known as a human being, we're not good enough. Normally it goes back to shame, which we will go into today. I've made loads of videos about this. But basically we feel like we're not good enough, and so we start to perform. And this performance basically means that we're going to play some kind of a role. We might always be the hero, we might always be the victim, we might be the shining star of the family, we might be the tough guy, we might be the crazy, chaotic, artistic one. Whatever it is, there's going to be some role that we identify with as a performance that we think is going to help us to increase our value in some way, instead of just standing in our realness and knowing that that's valuable enough in itself. When we're performing, we always end up disowning so many real parts of ourselves. But more than that, we have to follow a script. We can't just engage with people in life in a real way we constantly have to be filtering everything through the role that we're playing in order to keep the role, keep the mask of the role in place, instead of showing the world what's really there. And so normally when we're performing like this, again, it goes back to that childhood stuff. We learn these roles in childhood, but we have a felt sense of what's going on. We know when we're not being real with ourselves. And so when we're performing like this, we're going to feel a certain kind of friction, maybe frustration. We're going to feel that restless energy, the void. All of those things are basically feedback that we need to stop playing the role, stop performing, and start being present. But if we don't know, or if we don't really embody the truth of the fact that we don't need to justify our existence, then it's going to be really hard to let go of the role, because the role is the thing that gives us value or makes us think that we're getting value. But actually, the truth, or the deeper truth, is the most valuable thing that we can offer others is our realness. And so if we can take that mask off and just be present with others, that often does way more than any performance ever can or ever will. I have a strange fascination with this green rock. It's so mossy. If it wasn't going to break my back, I'd come and sleep on this one day. But yeah, it's been featured in these videos a few times. But there you go. The other subtle shift that we can make to overcome these old programmed tendencies to justify our existence and to explain ourselves are to shift into receiving from life instead of getting. Now, this is an extension of the roles thing, because when we're playing these roles, well, normally we have to try and get something from life to keep the role in place. But also, on a more subtle level, the roles themselves are an attempt to get something. We're trying to get validation, we're trying to get love, we're trying to get attention, we're trying to get noticed, whatever it is, right? There can be a million different things. But the role basically keeps us in this state of just constantly trying to get things from life. We're not present in life. We can't just receive what's already on offer. Like right now, here I am. I'm having an amazing experience. I don't need to worry about validation and things like this. I just feel so alive and connected to this whole place around me because I'm just here, breathing, being, walking around, chatting shit is great. The point is, you don't need to get things from life all the time. There's already so much to receive when you can relax and regulate yourself and just allow yourself to be. It all comes back to being. If you're not being whatever it is that you are, then you're going to be in this heightened state. Your nervous system's going to be all freaked out, and you're constantly going to be trying to get things to get rid of that feeling of the void. But the only way you're going to get rid of it is by learning to relax, which means you don't need to get anything. Actually, you can stop, you can receive what's already here, and then you can build with that instead of trying to fill yourself with your own programming, which is never going to work because it's unreal. One really important thing I should probably say is that accepting yourself doesn't mean that you're going to stay fixed or you're going to stay the way you are. Sometimes when we're talking about self-acceptance, we can use it as an excuse. And so it's like, my life sucks, I suck, but I am what I am, so just deal with it. Actually, that's not what we're saying, because when you really accept yourself, you have to accept reality as well. Reality is always moving and evolving, and that means to really accept yourself, you're not accepting yourself as a fixed thing. You have to accept your potential, you have to accept the things that you can grow into, you have to accept your vision, you have to accept deeper growth into wholeness. And so I'm not saying just accept yourself and then stop moving. I'm saying accept yourself so you can move in a real direction. The more that you run around like a headless chicken, performing your way through life, trying to get things from life, instead of just receiving and then flowing or building by taking real action, the more that you're going to feel like you have to explain yourself. And the reason you're going to feel like you have to explain yourself is because when you're performing and when you're getting, you know deep down that it's a performance and that it's not real. And so you are going to have to try and come up with all these little theories and explanations and evidence to try and prove to yourself and others that that way of being is actually real, even though you know it's not, because it's actually a reaction to shame and guilt and trauma and all those kind of things that cause you to become separated from yourself in life and feel like you have to put on this big performance of the ego in the first place. The thing is that the truth itself doesn't need to be justified or explained, because the truth is just the truth. All of these little things that we try to prove, or that we try and argue about, or that we try and justify, or that we try and explain in most cases, are just conceptual theories that are a reaction to our own disconnection from life. The truth itself does not need to be explained. The truth itself doesn't even need to be proved. All these conceptual theories and ideas that we come up with to try and prove the truth are just conceptual theories and ideas. And really, every time anyone argues about anything, or tries to justify anything, or prove anything, all they're doing is working at the level of the conceptual ideas and theories. That might sound really vague, sorry if it does, but anyway, the point is, the truth does not need to be justified or explained. And that's why we can say that when it comes to your realness, you can give up those two tendencies, because your realness is just what happens when you uncover the truth and live the truth by doing the work of awareness, acceptance, and action, deconstruct the ego, integrate the shadow, and then start taking real action so that you can get in touch with that core essence that's inside you at all times, because what's real is always real, and then you express it through some kind of real action. But there's no point justifying or explaining that, because if it's true, it's going to speak for itself. This is why so much of this that we're talking about comes back to this idea that I've shared a few times already, that I am what I am, and it is what it is. That is the truth. That's all you can really say about the truth. You don't need to get too complicated or convoluted about trying to interpret the truth. You know when you've been real with yourself, because it feels different to when you've not been real with yourself. And when you're doing things that are real instead of not real, you know, because you're going to get results, because the only place you can get results is in reality. So if you're not getting results, then you're either not being real about it, or you're trying to get something that's not real because of your ego stuff. You're trying to bring a shiny magical unicorn into your life or something like that. And so instead of trying to justify yourself and explain yourself and creating all this friction for yourself in your life and your relationship with yourself, one of the best strategies instead, in my opinion, is to stop the justification, stop the explanation, and to figure out something real that you want to do. What that means is that you calm yourself down, you get regulated, and you start to figure out who you are when you're calm and regulated, instead of running around stressed and driven by shame and all those kind of emotions. When you get regulated, you're going to get in touch with your essence. You're going to feel alive. You're going to start to see what your real values are, instead of the values of the world that you've picked up in an attempt to justify your existence and explain the things that you want to do. You're going to get in touch with your own values, your own real human values, and then you can turn them into a vision. So for example, maybe you get in touch with your creativity. It might have been buried for a while. You can create a vision for that creativity. You can make those values valuable to the world around you. So you're not just an isolated being, you're living in a way where you're making those values valuable to the people around you. And so everyone becomes a bit more real. And so what you need to do is create a vision for the real version of you. You might learn more about it as you go deeper into it, but that's fine. You break it down into goals, and then you break it down into habits, so that day by day, you're showing up as the version of you that doesn't need to justify things, doesn't need to explain things, but just does what's real and be's what needs to be, because that's what it all boils down to. You are what you are, it is what it is, and so you're going to do what you need to do. This is how you live as an adult, instead of being a little kid. So many times, we end up finding ourselves as those adult children in adult bodies, where we're showing up in life as just an extension of all that old conditioning, those old programs that make us think the external world has more power over us than it does. The truth is, you can do whatever you want. As long as it's real, you're not going to be hurting anyone, and you're going to keep growing and moving forward and evolving into deeper wholeness. And nobody needs to explain that. Nobody needs to justify it, because it is what it is. It's just true. And like we said, you don't need to justify the truth or prove the truth or explain the truth, because the truth speaks for itself. At the end of the day, life is amazing, but it's even more amazing when we receive life on its own terms and build with it instead of against it. That's what being real is all about. Figuring out how you can have a real relationship with yourself and a real relationship with life, instead of judging both and keeping yourself locked away from both. So if this video helped you, that's awesome. You can book a call with me on my website. There's a link here. I'll give you a free coaching session for Realness, help you figure out how you can get in touch with your values, figure out your vision, slow down, live a real life. But other than that, thank you for watching. Probably did ramble a bit rusty. I haven't made one of these videos for a few weeks. But anyway, I had a great time, and I hope you did too. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.